Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the fifth webinar in Hope Community Capital's 2026 Educational Webinar Series. We are grateful that you've chosen to spend the next hour with us. My name is Jana Woodhouse, and I support marketing and communications at Hope Community Capital. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Carrie Sanders, founder and CEO of Hope Community Capital. Carrie has spent more than 20 years helping nonprofits, CDFIs, and community organizations structure complex community development financing across the country. Through that work, she has become increasingly interested in a question that sits at the heart of today's discussion. What if the greatest challenge facing community development projects isn't access to capital, but the work required before capital can successfully be deployed? Today's webinar grew directly from that question. Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jana. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I am especially grateful to our panelists, who I'll introduce here in a minute, for sharing their time and investing their time and sharing their experience with us. Before I begin, I just want to spend a few minutes explaining why I wanted to host this conversation. So, Hope Community Capital has been looking at what it means for church-owned property to be redeveloped in a way that meets the desires, the needs, the goals of not only the church and their ministry, but of a flourishing neighborhood. And recently, this past spring, I was part of a session hosted by the City of Louisville, where the question was asked, what if affordable housing developed on faith land could solve or be a significant part of the solution to the city's affordable housing crisis? And that really got me thinking, how would a church ever be prepared to develop affordable housing at that scale? With that level of required capital, what would it take for a church to be able to even think about the requirements for that sort of capital stack, that type of role? So over the last few years, I think many of you on this webinar today may agree that church-owned property redevelopment, or faith land redevelopment, has become an increasingly important topic within community development. There's many practitioners working in this space now, more and more every day, from many different angles. And much of the national conversation has been focused on financing these projects, whether it's affordable housing or commercial space or even community service type assets. A lot of the conversation that I've been a part of has been, if we had the right kind of capital, we could get this done. I've heard things like pre-development capital. I've heard about operating capital. I've heard about de-risked capital, and so on and so forth. But based on my experience and also just our history of working with church-based redevelopment and church-based capital, I started to wonder, if capital was really the answer, wouldn't this problem be solved by now? Because I still abide by the idea that if it is an idea that is feasible and transformative and high impact, capital is not going to be in short. So with that question, I started wondering about how these projects stall. If capital is the only problem, and obviously they're making a great impact in their community, why are these projects stalling? And I do see that in our own portfolio here. And it's not because capital is unavailable, but what we see is that because organizations, church organizations, need help becoming ready for capital, ready for investment. We often see that they are working hard to clarify their mission as it relates to their real estate, that they need some assistance in development planning, navigating the many relationships between municipality and public and private investors. They need some organizational alignment within the own church to see how can we move forward with these ideas and redevelopment of our property. There's a gap in technical expertise often. And yes, of course, all churches will need thoughtfully, appropriately structured financing and investment. So that's why I chose the title Beyond Capital. And so today's discussion isn't about minimizing the importance of financing, certainly not. It's really about today recognizing that CDFIs, or community development financial institutions, brings something much broader and necessary to these projects. So just real briefly, what are CDFIs? Well, community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, are mission-driven lenders certified by the U.S. Department of the Treasury through the CDFI Fund, which was established by Congress in 1994. CDFIs, like the two CDFIs and their representatives that you'll meet here shortly, use capital to create economic opportunity and strengthen communities by financing projects that generate lasting impact. And they're often, just like the two CDFIs that you'll meet today, often pairing flexible financing with the expertise needed to help those projects succeed. So increasingly, CDFIs are not only serving as lenders, but also as development advisors, as consultants, helping organizations navigate complexity, strengthen their projects, assemble the proper partnerships needed to get these incredible projects done, and ultimately they position their capital to accomplish its intended purpose through their loans or investments into projects like we're going to talk about today. So church-owned property redevelopment, I think, provides an excellent lens through which we can explore that broader role of CDFIs. And I suspect that many of today's lessons apply far beyond church redevelopment and faithland development. And so with that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce two leaders whose organizations are helping to shape this work nationally. And there they are. Okay. So our first panelist is Reverend Dr. Patrick Dugan, Chief Divisional Operating Officer for the United Church of Christ Building and Loan Fund and Amistad Redevelopment Corporation, a national CDFI. Reverend Dr. Patrick Dugan is an authorized minister in the UCC and has served since 2012 as the Chief Divisional Operating Officer of the Church Building and Loan Fund, which is one of the nation's oldest church building societies, founded in 1853. Under Patrick's leadership, CBLF has advanced innovative mission-focused initiatives, including the denomination's first impact investment policy, the launch of Odyssey Fellowship for emerging spiritual entrepreneurs, and the creation of Amistad Redevelopment Corporation, or ARC, a certified CDFI supporting affordable housing and community development through church-owned real estate. Dr. Dugan brings 28 years of pastoral experience and has taught at the seminary level. He was the executive producer of the award-winning documentary, It Takes a Village, which we will be including as a resource with the follow-up email today, and describes his work as a mission to help churches live into God's economy by reimagining their assets for lasting social impact. Reverend Dr. Dugan asserts that he is on a mission to enable church leaders and congregations to live into God's economy. In this thinking guides CBLF's work at the leading edge of American Christianity, helping faith-based organizations to reimagine, redevelop, and redeploy their real estate assets to have continuing social impact and remain 100% mission-focused in the 21st century and beyond. Reverend Dr. Patrick Dugan, thank you so much for being here today. Our second panelist is Mabel Alvarez, Director of Investor Relations and Impact Investment Services at Nonprofit Finance Fund, a national CDFI that combines flexible financing with advisory expertise to help nonprofits and affordable housing developers move complex community projects from vision to reality. Mabel builds and manages partnerships with mission-driven investors that are dedicated to advancing community wealth and well-being. In her role, she also oversees the development, implementation, and management of over $100 million in community-centered funds, working alongside nonprofit and philanthropic partners to help move financial resources where they can make the greatest impact. Mabel brings over a decade of experience in social impact work, including her time at EL Education, where she led multi-year strategic initiatives supporting school districts across the country. We appreciate you both attending today and taking the time, and all of you attending today, for taking the time to learn about unlocking the full potential of faith-owned real estate assets through strategic financing, partnerships, and mission-aligned development. Let's begin. So, uh, thank you, panelists, very much for being here today. And I want to kick off with just a question about this idea that over the last several years, church property redevelopment has become a much larger topic nationally. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what has changed? And I'd love to start with Mabel, if we could start there.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So, if we look at what's been occurring in our nation over the past several years, one of the things that we're seeing that we're facing now is an affordability crisis. There are more families that are facing rent burden, where the majority of their income is going to rent. And we are seeing that the federal minimum wage has been stagnant, the gap is getting wider. And in general, as a CDFI, we're seeing that people are falling into homelessness faster than what housing is being built to help get people off the street. And this is something that is near and dear to churches. It's near and dear to our hearts at CDFIs. You know, churches are seeing their own members being displaced. And so we're also seeing a lack of resources to support these communities. And also, as that is happening, where we're seeing this housing deficit, whether it's in New Jersey, where there are about 200,000, they have a 200,000 housing unit deficit. California's in the millions. And while that is happening, we've seen over the past several years that cost of material, cost of labor, interest rate, all of that has increased and continues to rise. And one of the most amazing things is that a lot of these churches, they own their property, which is an advantage. And it's an ideal situation right now where we're able to work together to tackle these issues that we're seeing.
And Patrick, yeah, again, over the last several years, church property redevelopment, I think you can agree, has become a much larger topic, and you've been at that table for that topic discussion nationally for quite a few years. What is changing? Why is it getting into the front here?
Well, yeah, thank you, Carrie, first of all, for inviting us to be here, and it's great to meet Mabel. But I think it's a convergence of several factors. Certainly, I agree with Mabel. The demand for affordable housing and the rise in homelessness is dear to the heart of churches. But at the same time, you have churches that are, I think most of our participants have probably heard about the decline in Christianity. It's basically a decline in membership. But those of us that look at this closely see this not just as a decline, but a season of transformation that involves not just the the decline in membership, but the change in our culture, and also um, uh, um, the demand that this decline, the pressure that it puts on church properties. For those churches that are actually closing, what do you do with the property? And often that's just sell, but sometimes it's not that simple. For the denominations that, or the structures that many churches are in above, outside of the church, it's how do we deal with this coming wave that we see of property transitions? And then with that is this legislation that's become popular in many states and some municipalities. Yes, in God's backyard is often the term that's used, that makes it possible for churches to build with fewer regulations and with certain you no longer have to worry about environmentals and so forth, so that the process for redeveloping a church property is possible. It's also organizations like ours and enterprise, nonprofit fund, and others who are focusing on this problem. and talking to churches and talking to each other. And I think that combination of factors is why it's become a very hot topic. I was just looking at a stat yesterday where churches are in construction, in the construction industry. Construction in all other industries is down by 1% right now. Within faith-based construction, it's up 17%. So that shows you the activity that's out there and the desire to do something new with properties. And for churches, is to do something new that advances the mission of the church, not just, well, let's build a casino, but it has to, for churches, many churches feel like we have to advance some of our beliefs, values, and our mission in whatever we do with the redevelopment of a property.
You mentioned YIGBY, yes, in God's backyard legislation. And my interpretation of what you said there is that it kind of helps smooth some of the processes, kind of, at least makes the way in a different way. Do either one of you want to add your thoughts on where YIGBY is and what that might mean in this moment as you just shared, Reverend Dr. Patrick Dugan, we'll just call you Patrick from now on.
Yes, please.
As you shared, construction is uptick. Yes, is moving up. I mean, is there any relationship with some of the YIGBY legislation that we're seeing across the nation? Either one of you want to chime in about that?
Yes, I definitely. And this is something that, as Patrick was saying, as Reverend Patrick was saying, that is occurring. Patrick, I'll call you Patrick. That's been occurring across the nation, and not all states have adapted it. You're seeing different movements of trying to push this bill into law. California was one of the first ones. They put this into law back in 2023, and it allows churches and religious institutions to bypass the zoning issues that they're having to be able to get their permits. And a lot of that is one of the reasons why certain projects are stalling, because they're coming up against municipalities and they're coming up against a lot of other restrictions, red taping, et cetera. And so YIGBY is a movement that is helping churches, religious and other faith-based institutions move forward. I was reading earlier that Virginia earlier this year put the bill into law, and it will take effect in January of 2027. New Jersey, which is my personal backyard, my home, which I love, it's not, it hasn't been put into law yet. There are different iterations of the bill. It keeps getting pushed forward and pushed back. And I've sat at tables where, they're trying to figure out how to actually move this forward because it's becoming more difficult to construct. And unfortunately, well, I know we'll get into that in a bit, but, I think it's important to understand is that just because you own the property doesn't mean that you can start building, and that's a lot of things that people are thinking, like, I own this, I should be able to do what I want with it. That would be ideal, but that is not always the case. And so YIGBY and this movement of YIGBY is something that we want to see happen in every single state. I'm pushing for New Jersey to finally put it into law, and we see the difference working in states that have put this into law as opposed to others that haven't, and the struggles that they continue to face.
Yeah, I think the law is definitely driving some of it. Certainly in California, our team was out there last month, and we visited 8 properties. 4 of them are in construction and others want to be. But it's not only that. I think it's a combination of those factors. And I agree that the legislation, some states are looking at their municipalities that have some version of it, like in New York City. And I was trying to think if it was Columbus or Cincinnati, Ohio, one of them just adopted a citywide legislation. So legislation is driving it, but I think it's several factors. Some of it has to do with the fact that the denominations, we're starting to focus on it a lot more in the last 5 years. For us, since almost 12 years now. So it's a combination of factors that's driving what we see now.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And thanks, Mabel, for the little nudge I need to walk across the street to the Capitol and see what I can do about Yigbee in Wisconsin. So you heard it here. Okay. Let's move on to, uh-oh, we lost Mabel. Well, hopefully Mabel will come back. The next topic I want to get to is the question of, is capital really the biggest challenge with all this momentum going? And again, you know, in my introduction, I shared that one of the reasons I wanted to host this webinar is that often I hear people say, we just need more capital. People being some of my church property redevelopment clients and partners. We just need more capital. But I'm not convinced that that's the whole story. So I'd love to hear from you, Patrick, you know, what actually prevents these projects, church-owned property redevelopment, what prevents them from moving forward?
Well, I don't want to dismiss a demand for capital as not a problem, but as we know it is. But it is not the only issue. You know, we especially in congregational polity, the churches where the leadership is local and not reporting to some above, there's a sense of we can do anything. So you'll have churches that will say, we'll just call a developer and say, hey, come over. And maybe they'll get into a not so good deal. And in some traditions, you know, where the pastor has strong leadership, there's a sense that, you know, all you got to do is recruit the right people and you can get it done. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's sort of a corporate naivete among churches, because this is construction development is not the expertise for churches. And I think if you don't understand it, it might seem like, well, you just put up a building, but knowing the process of doing that is not common knowledge among clergy, or maybe you have somebody in the church. So there's that. And there's also a need for churches when they're going to embark on something like this. You know, as a pastor, you know, you see need and you know we should do something about it based on our values, our beliefs, our, you know, calling, whatever you want to call it. But oftentimes you just don't have a clear vision of what you want to do. And I think it's important as the best models for us is when a church is clear about where the church wants to go and has, in terms of their vision, and that their mission is clear in terms of what they want to accomplish. And most of all, they have a very clear need of the understanding of the need in the community. You can't, you know, like churches open daycare centers, right? They often operate daycare centers and they say, oh, that's a good idea. Let me do one. But suppose there's 2 or 3 down the street. You know, so maybe that's not the best thing to do. So it can't just be, we have a heart for children, let's open a daycare. You have to also go on the other side. Well, is there a demand for daycare here? Or is there a demand for, say, senior daycare? Or maybe there's a demand for health interventions. And that could be the thing that you do. In other words, mission vision has to also meet with need in your local community, because when you develop something to serve the community, you know, you want them to actually be served. And so you don't want to kind of miss that. And I think that's what churches can do well. What is our vision? What is our mission? What's the need we are good at, or that's we are uniquely good at in terms of future development of our property and our space. And we find that when churches find that sweet spot, they also have the capacity to revitalize ministry, grow the church, all that kind of stuff. So it's essential that churches should stay in their lane in terms of what we're good at and seek assistance and help for the things that require expertise, like development. So that's what's going on.
And Mabel,
Glad
you're
Mabel's
back. Yes, wonderful.
Yes. Sorry
So
about
Mabel,
that. Difficulties.
well, we're just talking about again, is capital the whole story in church property redevelopment? And you can hear where I'm going with that. No, it's not the whole story. Very important part of the story, right? And so I was curious, Mabel, if you would like to comment on maybe any of the challenge that you may see as an impact investor, as a CDFI lender, and you walk alongside these projects often at NFF. How much of the challenge is borrower readiness, that readiness to take on significant capital and be ready to repay it versus access to funding? So borrower readiness, what are you seeing in that when some of these projects may be approaching NFF or just the larger community development finance? Any thoughts there?
Of course, yes. And sorry if I'm going to repeat anything that Patrick said. Technical difficulties is always among us during these times. So one of the things that we see at NFF, so at NFF, we have an initiative called Faith in Our Community. And through this initiative, we are investing in faith-based institutions that, desire to redevelop their property. And through this initiative, we provide pre-development loans. And there's other sources of funding in there as well. And we have partnered with Trinity Wall Street for this initiative, that they were able to provide us with funding to allow churches to have more flexible financing, in a sense of it was a loan guarantee. So it allows us to enter the space a little different and take on higher risk. So what we're seeing in our pipeline and what we're seeing with churches that we partner with is that readiness is extremely important. A lot of those that have come to us are not necessarily in the space to they're not loan ready. They're not ready to, okay, let's move this forward in our typical 4 to 6 weeks to turn this investment around. These are deals and these are projects that we're seeing because of the lack of readiness, that it's taking months, even over a year, to actually move this forward. Because you mentioned this earlier, Carrie, around the pre-development piece. So they're coming to us not having that pre-development work done. They don't have their consultant identified, and this is their representative. Patrick, you hinted at this before, that they don't need to be the expert in the room, and that is very true. And that is a misconception, that you need to have X amount of years in the field and you need to speak the developer language. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is partner with somebody that has the expertise. So we're seeing that they don't have the consultant identified. They don't have the cost associated with a consultant. They're not aware of this information. And, they haven't done their feasibility study. They haven't done the expenses associated with design. Alongside what Patrick was saying, they haven't even presented, or they haven't done the work to present these designs to their church board. There are a lot of churches. There are some churches that are independent, and then there are some churches that focus on a hierarchy. And we've seen as CDFIs that sometimes we're not even speaking to the right person, meaning the decision maker, when we think we are. Sometimes it happens that, well, wait, I need to go speak to, the overseer of this, or I need to go then. And then there's certain levels before a project can even be approved internally by their stakeholders. So that work in itself has not occurred yet. And then one of the benefits of having a consultant is that they're able to help you navigate with all of this. They're able to help you identify the right developer to work with, that has integrity, that wants to see, this project move forward for the purpose that it was actually meant to, not see you as a church being taken advantage of, that unfortunately we have seen. They help you outline your sources and your uses. As a CDFI, we need to have you your capital stack needs to be identified. Your costs need to be identified, whether it's soft costs, hard costs. You need to be able to identify all of your uses and all of your sources so that then you can identify, okay, how much do I really need to borrow? What do I really need? What is available? What's out there? What grants are available that, I can maybe lean on this first? I will cover the pre-development costs and cover some of the pre-development costs. And when I'm ready to then go out and take a loan and work with a CDFI and move this portion forward, I have done XYZ. But we've seen in instances where they've come to us and they haven't done this work and they're creating their own budget within themselves. And then when we let them know, hey, you need to have a developer, you need to have this, and they go back and they understand the cost, they're like, wow, we are actually $1 million or $2 million short. We need to go back and fundraise. And then that causes even more delays. So these are some of the things that we're seeing where if they would have had the right guidance, if they would have been ready, it would have saved time. Because one of the things that we need to factor in is that as time moves forward, the cost of materials increase and the cost of labor continues to increase. That's not put on pause because we're not ready.
Yeah, I mentioned at the top of the call that I had the opportunity to attend the Louisville Faith-Based Development Summit. And one of the key points that was made by one of the projects that I believe ARC has invested in, Molo Village in Louisville, one of the items that Reverend Jamzetta Ferguson mentioned is that, you have no control over where construction costs are going. You can control how much money you raise for the project. That is something you have control over. Well, I was curious, Patrick, I know that you and your team look at a lot of loan applications and opportunities to invest in projects across the nation. And I was just curious, what does a good project look like when it comes to you? When you say, all right, I'm ready to send this to underwriting and we're ready to take this to committee. Like, what are just maybe 3 to 5 elements that's when yep, and your team knows, yep, we're ready to take this to underwriting. What does a good project look like? Elements.
So, we do 2 different types of lending. One is just the traditional lending that the fund has done for 100 and something years, where churches they need a boiler or they're renovating or something like that. And then we have the more complicated projects, affordable housing, people. Now, most of the time, a good application will come as a result of some of the things Mabel is talking about. They have a developer. The need is clear, the costs are clear, the direction they're going, the type of project they're doing. That's the ideal. The ones that aren't, and so because we deal with all kinds of churches, they're churches that come to us and they don't know how to do a simple financial statement, income statement, and balance sheet. We've gotten literally only once actually financial statements on a napkin, or none at all. There depending on the church and the tradition, there's not necessarily a capacity to deal with finance, and it's tough in this day and age when costs were low and it was different times in our country. You didn't really need a lot of expertise to do things like add it to your property or to buy a property or whatever. But now that's not the case, and a lot of all leaders are not equipped to connect. You might be a fantastic preacher, a fantastic organizer and leader, but you're not equipped to really communicate with a lender. And so, we help folks by, we walk alongside them and walk them through that. We'll help them put together a budget. We'll handhold for those who are wanting to do an affordable housing or some kind of bigger project. We're not even talking about financing until we get a clear sense of where they are. Some people say we want to build housing, we need about $1 million, and I'm like, well, okay. Where's your plan? Who's your developer? Those kind of things. It's really basic. It's not, I don't see it as a real complicated issue. It's the expertise needed in this day and age with the cost of construction and the challenge with the regulatory environment. It's not helpful for a church to go into this thinking, oh, I can do this without the appropriate help. And the other thing is, you don't want to have a volunteer from within the congregation. Oh, I got a lawyer, or I know somebody's a developer, because you want to be able to fire the people you hire for that help. And you can't fire a member of the church. And I'm not suggesting you're going to fire them, but if they're not working out for you, what do you do if they're a church member? So the things like that, they're not complicated issues, but if you're going to, and it's sort of like, if you're going to, many churches have choirs. You can just come on Sunday and sing, but choirs are much better when they have rehearsal and they have a choir leader and they know what they're going to sing. So I think you got to take that same thinking to, we want to do something with our property, prepare so that you can do the thing for the property. So
I want to just pick up on a couple things that I heard there. Well, one thing I didn't hear, but as someone who has done quite a bit of, and I love doing underwriting too for our CDFI clients, and I review a lot of it. But I train our team. What is the number one thing we're looking for here? One word: repayment. Why do we need repayment for CDFIs? There's so many reasons, right? And many of us on the call know this very much by heart, but repayment allows us to keep reinvesting in our mission as a CDFI. And so we are looking for repayment. The other piece that I heard wasn't said, but I heard patient capital. That is something, it should be CDFIs-patient capital. So we are very patient as CDFIs. Of course, Hope Community Capital is not a CDFI. I want to be clear. We work with the best of the best CDFIs in this country, and we're very grateful. But our CDFIs are very, very patient, okay? And that is important. But sometimes we'll get some frustration, right, from the prospective borrower. Where's my loan application? How come I haven't heard from you? What's going on? And it may be that the CDFI is patiently waiting for a budget that balances. We're patiently waiting for a general contract that has been signed. We are patiently waiting. And so kind of with that, I want to come tee up to the next group of questions, and I'll be coming to you, Mabel, and then I'll be coming to you, Patrick. But we want to talk about then, given some of those constraints, given the kind of like excitement for more of this type of property development, what is the role that CDFIs like NFF, like ARC should be playing? And so do you have programs that support the technical assistance needed, the strategic planning needed, maybe some pre-development support, any other partnerships, capital stack design, organizational capacity? We've mentioned many of the barriers already. But just curious how NFF looks at that. Beyond capital, is NFF doing anything in that space that you want to share about, Mabel?
Yeah, so as a CDFI, and thank you for these awesome questions, Carrie. We have a consulting arm that does provide technical assistance to different nonprofits that are facing similar issues. Because yes, we're talking specifically about churches, but our consulting arm does provide a lot of consulting and technical assistance in general. our underwriting team and at NFF, especially under the Faith in Our Communities, which is our church based initiative, one of the things that we are doing there is being more flexible with our underwriting, which falls into the technical assistance piece. There are things that we just won't know until we have a conversation. So, when we are having a conversation where we would normally require or ask for your audited financial statements, the church will say, I don't have that. We don't do that. It's like, okay, well, do you have a 990, which is something that a church should be having? And so we'll work with them. Like, what is it that you're reporting to the IRS? We need to get a financial picture of your church to be able to move forward. And even in these conversations, helping them identify what a secure repayment looks like. What's a secure source of repayment? Or I helping them identify their capital stack around the sources and the uses. And if I may take this question in a twofold, when we're talking about strategic planning, or I like to have strategic conversations all the time. So when we're talking about that as a CDFI, one of the things that we can be doing is having these strategic conversations and planning internally, and also when we're being presented or working with investors and our funders. There are many times where we have these opportunities and we have a seat at the table. We're talking to our funders constantly. And in the CDFI world, we're all talking to the same funders for the most part. We're all, you received an investment from this funder, so did we. We're all in this together. We partner a lot, right? CDFIs, we are not in competition. We're working alongside each other because the work is serious, the work is needed, and we are passionate about this. So when we are in conversations with investors, with these funders, bring this topic. It's our role, it's our job to bring this topic to the forefront. I had an investor one time tell me, we recognize that we're the purse. Let us know where the need is. We want to learn, we want to do more. And I find that to be amazing, because one thing that we need is long-term flexible capital. And I'm going to continue to ring that bell. We need long-term flexible capital. Where a church, it's hard for them to do a short term. It's hard for them not to be able, to pay back in 6 months, when we're seeing a decline in membership and we're seeing all these things. So the longer the term, the more flexible the capital CDFI receives, the better a product and the better financing support we can put them back out to the churches.
Okay, can I get an amen for long-term capital? Low cost, long-term capital
Yes,
invested in
yes,
CDFIs. Can I get an amen? I think it's appropriate.
yes.
Patrick, ARC has an incredible program that you've had for a long time, Partners in Vision. And I think that program, as I understand it and have had the honor of interacting with it a little bit, really does respond to that advisory piece before we're going to be submitting a loan application for any type of CDFI funding. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Partners in Vision program?
Sure. It was a combination of an emergent vision and the reality of a specific property in the United Church of Christ. We had a 200-acre retreat center that was basically insolvent reach out to us and say, can you help? So we did that, and we realized that this was a need out there, that there were different kinds of needs and different kinds of properties that needed attention, different kinds of development that were we were starting to see. This is in 2013. So we put together Partners in Vision, which is basically a development services program. We take churches from pre-development, or to the development of the property, what we call from concept to completion, where we walk alongside the church through a series of interventions over every month. We're talking to the same church as they move through the process. We help them, in order to get into the Partners in Vision, they must first have a mission statement that's clear, and a vision, first of all, for their community, what I was talking about before, and some kind of strategic plan, which we help them with. I should back up and say that the Church Building Loan Fund has, for at least the last 20 years, since about 2007, done training for churches. And we train from 800 to 1,000 church leaders every year around the country. And it's all about how do we help equip churches for the demands and needs of today. And so that's sort of part of how we envision Partners in Vision. And so what we did was I reached out to a colleague of mine, Sandra Acosta of AIM Development Group, who is a developer and has developed over 2,000 units of affordable housing in New York City, but with the New York City partnership before going out on her own. We worked together on a project in Nassau County in the 2000s when I was head of economic development for Nassau County, and she's and we became friends. And so Sandra's been running Partners in Vision since 2013. We've served over 100 churches. We've helped churches with $20 million in financing for projects. Couple of signature projects, the Molo Village CDC in Louisville with their village at West Jefferson, and that was an $8 million project. Another $8 million project was Resurrected Community Development Corporation in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and our first actual housing type project, and actually not first, it's first in modern times, at Genesis Worship Center in Oakland, California, working with the remarkable Sibley Simon as a developer. Those all came out of Partners in Vision. And currently we have about 15 churches actively engaged in pre-development and pre-development, combined total of about $230 million in construction projects, most of them, about a third of them, affordable housing. That'll be coming online in the next few years. And it's really about how do we walk alongside a church so that they can not fall into the pitfalls that churches who don't have that opportunity. For the financing side, for those who are going to be deploying capital for those projects, it's de-risking. We because we've done all of the work with them to be sure that they're ready. You now have as opposed to a project you might just see at the end of the process, they're looking for financing. We can point to the series of activities and ways that we have helped the church be ready for this project, and up to and including helping them identify a developer. Not just we'll actually train them how to choose a developer, how to seek one out, and then we'll help them do that. And then they choose a developer. And so far, they've always chosen the best one of the group. So it's an expensive program. The fund has been funding it 100%. We'll need to develop some outside sources to continue it, but it's been an impactful program and a successful program over the years, and we've made back our investment 5 times over. So that's how we've approached it. We're the only denomination out there that has such a program that's so comprehensive. But I think the real point is you got to have some kind of preparation, even if it's short. I mean, Enterprise does a program that prepares people over a few weeks or a couple of months, I think it is, so that they at least understand what the process of construction and development is all about. And then they are, if they successfully complete that, they get some money to hire a developer or something like that. So that's Partners in Vision, and that's how we've addressed that problem.
There's a few things I heard there, but one is there's a lot of great projects coming through Partners in Vision. Not all of them can be financed by ARC. And so for any of the CDFIs on this call, what a wonderful pipeline for originations. So keep Patrick in mind for that. And Mabel, did you want to share something?
Around just additional to this, I think as CDFIs or as NFF, one of the things that we've seen that's important as NFF when we move forward, when we're working with a project is, there are different scenarios of this. And one thing that I did want to highlight is there are churches that do want to redevelop their property, but that doesn't necessarily equivalent to continuing of ownership of that property. So, we've seen in our pipeline working with a trusted developer, and I keep using the word trusted developer, a mission-aligned developer, because not all of them have the integrity of the work. Not saying that they're all bad, but there are churches that have this property that's no longer being used for many reasons, decline in membership, et cetera. And so they want this property to go to good use, whether it's a community center that providing resources to the community or turning into the affordable housing. But they no longer want to necessarily own it, but they want to ensure that the integrity of that space continues to move forward. We've seen mission-aligned developers approach us, and we have worked with them in our pipeline. One of the deals is that we've worked with, there was this developer in New Jersey that we've worked with this person so many times, and they've come to us because a church has a lot. They don't know what to do with the lot. They wanted to sell the lot to turn into a multi-use facility. And so we worked with that developer and provided them, or in a process of providing them with an acquisition loan that they're able to then acquire that property and turn it into affordable housing. Another example that we've seen is a church in New York that has a empty warehouse, and they, want to partner with a developer in the way that they've come to us ready. They had a consultant. They worked with the developer. They identified all of their sources and uses. This also took months, almost a year. I just want to, they first came to us in March of 25, and this is a deal that took, time through the pipeline, not necessarily because of our delays, but just as preparation. And you hit the word in the beginning about patient capital. So while we worked with them, they needed to go through different things and get approval up to the AG to do the demolition, et cetera. So these are the things that we've seen. These are the ways that we've come in and supported these scenarios, these churches and their project. And there is one thing that I did want to mention, and this is not something that is in our pipeline necessarily. And Patrick, I am sure that you have friends and family and people that that will just, message you and saying, hey, I need help. Hey, do you know of any grants that are around? And so sitting where we sit at a CDFI and having the knowledge that we do, I often get people that reach out to me. And the reason why this topic and this work is so important, last month I received a message from a friend that they didn't hire the consultants and they were doing the work and working with a developer, and, they received approval for a grant from New York. And many times we see that the grants, the way that they work is that you have to spend the money before you can receive the money. And so, they worked with the developer that let them know X cost. And so the costs was the same amount as the grant. And in the middle of the project, when the hole is already in the wall, what do we see? More funding is needed. About $300,000 in addition to what they originally budgeted is needed. And this is something that they did not prepare for. But now, they're having a church with a hole in the wall in the middle of New York and not knowing what to do and trying to figure out how can they find additional funding to move the project forward when construction was supposed to be done around this time. But obviously it's going to be delayed because they're trying to figure out where the additional capital is going to come from. And those are many things that we see. And these are things that if you were to go through the right, methods, even just having a conversation with us, we'll be able to identify certain things so that poor financial decisions are not being made. So.
Well, thank you, Mabel. And I saw Patrick nodding. I certainly was nodding. These are heartbreaking stories that you just shared, and we've all heard them. And they cannot all be avoided in my experience, but some of that risk can be mitigated with some of the things that we've talked about today, including reaching out to your CDFI contacts, and having an early conversation to see what redevelopment could look like, what would be needed to work with an FF or to work with ARC. We have about 5 minutes left. I'm not sure, Jana, if we have any questions from the audience. We could probably take one.
Okay. We had one question. It was about contact information. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll send that out to you throughout the webinar. So I do have one question for you. Our church wants affordable housing, but we also want to remain on the site and continue our ministry. How do we balance community impact, financial feasibility, and preserving the church's long-term presence?
Let me jump in on that. Yeah, so we generally want churches to retain ownership of the property, and not all the time is possible or makes sense, but that's we prefer they do a ground lease so that and most developers will. But if you're doing something on the same property, you may, depending on the site, there might be a possibility that you can cordon off certain areas. But if you're doing affordable housing, it's probably, I don't know that that's a smart way to plan, because more than likely you can't be there while the construction is going. I mean, you might have to. Oftentimes, the project involves clearing the property and building something new. So obviously, you can't be on site. If it's an adjacent property, or if it's a huge property and you have some auxiliary space or something, then maybe it's possible. But I think the good news is, if you listen to what we've been saying, you want to have a consultant or an organization that has some experience to help you figure that out. Whatever I tell you on a webinar, don't run with that, because I'm giving general advice. You are a specific property, and you don't even know if, and I don't know if you've done feasibility. If you have not done the feasibility that says affordable housing is appropriate here, then you need to go way back from that decision, or that question about, can we stay on the property? Can you build affordable housing? Or are there 15 affordable housing projects around you, and the need is for something else that you can deliver? So I think those are the kinds of questions that it's good to ask, but you need to ask it to somebody that can, a consultant or organization that's focused on your specific project. There's no such thing as a generic affordable housing project, in other words.
Yeah, I would just add on to what you said, Patrick. All amazing responses. There, just for an idea, after you've done all the work that Patrick has identified, there are projects that are mixed use projects. So if you want to have a partial affordable housing in another part of it, because I don't know what level or what kind of ministry you're trying to do it. It can be a community space where you're doing a youth program, or whatever ministry that you want. It is possible to do a mixed use project and have a mixed use facility where it's partial affordable housing, partial a community space, and even partial retail. We've seen a mix of that, but just know that definitely needs to go through the steps Patrick identified. But you can have a mixed use facility if that's what you're thinking of.
Well, we could have a conference on this topic. Jana's going to wrap us up, but I want to thank you both very, very much for this important conversation, and the conversation will keep going. So appreciate you both very much, and appreciate our entire audience. Jana?
Yes, thank you both, all panelists, Carrie, Patrick, and Mabel. This wraps up the question and answer and the entire webinar for you. To all of you that have joined us, thank you. We hope this webinar provided useful strategies and lessons learned. As a reminder, you will find this recording and other educational resources on our resources webpage at hopecommunitycapital.com. Our sixth webinar in our 2026 series, NMTC After Closing, Building Your Compliance Roadmap for Years 1 through 7, is coming up on Wednesday, August August 24th. HCC's Sierra Johnson will be joined by Sarah Cunningham and Marilyn Thomas from CCML to talk through how you can best be prepared for a smooth exit. Registration is open. You can register via links provided on HCC's events webpage. Stay up to date with upcoming events, news, and insights by joining our mailing list. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.